Welcome to the Body and Beyond podcast with Alice and Gina,
a podcast sparking discussion on all things health, mindset, fitness, goals, and motivation.
We strive to help you to boost your confidence, to take the lead in your own life, to back yourself, and to step into your full potential. Body and Beyond is proudly sponsored by The Seed Cycle. The Seed Cycle is a beautiful female-founded Australian company. Seed cycling is a natural methodology that you can use to support your menstruation and your ovulation, and it can even be used to support your hormones through perimenopause and menopause. Use the code BODY and BEYOND at the Seed Cycle website www.theseedcycle.com.au. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Body and Beyond podcast. Alice and I have the amazing Dr. Chris Swart joining us again today. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. How are you guys? Of course, it's not morning over here in the United States.
Yes, sorry.
For you guys. Great to be back on. I'm really looking forward to this. We got a lot of good topics to cover today.
Absolutely. So today we thought we would cover training, some myths around what the best exercise is for fat loss, energy systems, all of the above. And
what a more fitting person to do it with us than Dr. Chris.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it, really.
Yes, absolutely. So what episode were you on for us earlier?
I think it was episode 10. It was somewhere between 10 and 15.
Yeah,
and basically just covered an array of myths related to fitness and nutrition.
That's right.
So I'm excited for this one to kind of hone in on a couple specific ones.
Yeah, exactly. So could you, for our listeners, just give us a quick rundown of who you are? And obviously they can listen to episode 10 for a more in-depth introduction, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. So my name is Dr. Chris Swart. I am currently a full-time college professor at American International College in Springfield, Massachusetts in the United States. My main area of expertise is exercise physiology. So I really kind of like the deep cellular level of how the body functions. That's really, kind of my area of expertise. But over the years, I've branched into strength and conditioning. I've done some work in the nutrition space. And so stress and recovery management, all those different types of things. I've worked as a strength and conditioning coach for different universities, specializing mainly in the sport of football. I've worked with the general public. I've worked with some clinical populations. So really, a vast array of different populations for sure, both in like group fitness settings and then private one-on-one training. So my undergrad is in exercise science. My master's is in strength and conditioning. And then I went on for my doctorate, in the specific area of exercise physiology. So full-time professor by trade, but I try to dabble in the field as much as I can. And then recently within the last year, I have become a competitive CrossFit athlete. So I'm kind of in the CrossFit space and working towards, that area of fitness. So having a lot of fun with that.
How are you enjoying that?
I really love it. I really love it. And it's interesting because, this is one of those things you want to continuously evolve as an exercise or any professional. But I used to really knock CrossFit early on in my professional career. I just saw so many people getting injured and I kind of fell into that trap. And, CrossFit is a very demanding sport. Don't get me wrong. You need to be able to have, a wide array of abilities. But it's the people that if you do it the right way and you get into a right facility around the right people and you set up your training, like we'll talk about throughout this podcast, you're smart about your training, you can do it in a very smart way. So I'm loving it. I really enjoy it. I feel like I'm a relatively strong person, but not really strong. I'm a good aerobic person, but not really good. And CrossFit really kind of sits in the middle there. Can you be strong and fit? So I'm having a lot of fun with it for sure.
Yeah, so cool. So we thought we would cover some myths around fat loss again. And I feel like constantly people ask, what's the best training for fat loss? And we know that nutrition plays such a massive part in fat loss. But from your perspective and the research you've done, how do you tackle this question when people come to you with this one?
Yeah, fat loss is a challenging question because there's so many different reasons why in different, even just the psychology. Like I'm going to talk about the physiology side, but there's a whole other piece of this in the brain and the psychology around behavior change and food choices and all that type of stuff, which I respect now more in my career than ever. But when we start to tackle the fat loss question, because it probably is for general fitness the most important question that people ask, I think the number one thing that any person or any listener needs to understand is, just to your point, nutrition is the massive lever that you can pull for fat loss. I mean, you can you can lose a lot of weight just nutritionally. It's very difficult to lose a lot of weight only relying on fitness if you just let your nutrition go awry. So because of that, anybody that's looking to tackle fat loss has to understand that. Then the next thing I think that's really important to understand is, because we're going to talk a lot about cardiovascular exercise in this, podcast. And I think it's really important for people to understand that we do not want to rely on cardiovascular exercise as our main fat loss tool. And like early on in my career, I used to hear, and still to this day, hear a lot of people say, well, if I want to lose weight, I'm going to do more running. I'm going to do more swimming, biking, rowing, whatever the form of cardio that you really enjoy. And we've kind of learned a lot through research, especially over the last like 10 years-ish, where, you don't get to essentially like eat back all of the calories that you burn either. So it's not like just because you burn 500 calories in a workout session, let's say, that you now have that extra 500 calories to play with. We know it's going to be a percentage of that, but it's probably not going to be as much as people think. Your metabolism will adapt, and you might move less throughout the course of the day, fidget less, or I'm the type of person that moves my hands a lot when I talk. I might do that less. I might blink less throughout the course of the day. So some of our, like what we call non-exercise activity, starts to drop. So the point there is, yes, you can get some of the way with cardio, but nutrition is going to be the bigger lever for sure. Then once people kind of understand that, now we get into kind of the deeper levels of, well, okay, if I am going to do aerobic exercise, because that is very important, like what type of aerobic exercise should I do? How much should I do? And then how do I work this around like resistance training? Because I always tell people, in my opinion, I think resistance training is like the secret weapon for fat loss. I mean, that just in and of itself, maintaining a strong body with a lot of lean body mass, you're going to have a better metabolism. Your metabolic health will go up. A lot of people are starting to call skeletal muscle the organ of longevity. So having more lean mass, we're seeing in a lot of ways is more beneficial for longevity. So now it's like, okay, how do I kind of strategize this cardio? So I'm going to stop there to see if you guys have any points to add. Then we'll start to get into, okay, what about fasted cardio versus some of these other types?
Yeah. I think it's probably a really important point to make as well, just back on that, when you mentioned eating back calories. A lot of people still do think that, just because your watch told you burned 500 calories in that cardio workout that you did, when really people also need to be aware that the watches aren't, a direct, reliant source of information when it comes to your actual calorie burn for a workout either. So definitely don't rely on that to tell you exactly how many calories you burned anyway. It's a nice kind of tool to use, I guess, but
there was a really prominent a meta-analysis. And for the listeners out there, a meta-analysis is just like a combination of a bunch of studies all in one, and then they come up, with a common conclusion. And basically what they found was a lot of these fitness trackers were anywhere between like 9 and like over 90% inaccurate. So some people that were just trying to go and like you just said, Alice, like just look at calorie burn and then eat that, you're not even close at that point. Now, a fitness tracker might be able to tell you some trends. So it might be able to say, okay, you probably burned a little bit more calories in this workout compared to another one, which may or may not be useful information for you. But I do think that people rely way too much on the activity trackers and not so much on, some other things that I think they can more directly control and measure, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, agree. Gina, did you want to make any other points?
Not really. I mean, to that as well, I mean, it's so common for people who use cardio equipment, to, again, believe what the treadmill is saying or the cross trainer is saying, and it's not necessarily accurate for them, their body mass, their composition, it's their age or weight, and gender. Like, it's just not customized to that individual.
I think
Go ahead, Alice.
No, you go.
So I think when people type in their weight, even in like a traditional, we all have all these different apps that we function with nowadays. I think people think that just because they typed in, okay, I weigh X amount of pounds or kilograms, I'm this height, I have this activity, they're all guess, some of this is guessing, whether you're lightly active or moderately active. And, people will put these in equations. And the bottom line is, it's only a bell curve. It's only accurate if you sit right in the middle of that bell curve. And I think a lot of people will say, well, I tried to type in calories in a calorie estimate online and I ate less than that and fat loss didn't work for me. So a calorie deficit just doesn't work. But they don't realize the inaccuracy of even some of our most popular scientific formulas that we have in the research still have, fairly large, errors that are going to occur throughout this. And I think people need to realize, one of the best things you can do is just start to rely on your own data, use yourself, not only how you feel, but, for people who do track things like body weight, like how strong they are, what their 1 mile time is, find ways to track things that work best for you and measure yourself long-term for sure.
Yeah. I think also what might be a good place to start is also maybe if you could explain to our audience just the different energy systems and the different types of cardio and where they sit, just so we can have a rough idea of kind of what the difference is between, because I think some people will still refer to low intensity cardio as, or something, doing a type of cardio in the fat burning, zone. That's the word. Yeah. So maybe if you could explain, let's just start, with what are the different energy systems and what type of exercise does that correlate to?
Yeah, I love this question because if you don't understand the just general, and you don't have to have a super scientific understanding, but just a general understanding of these energy systems, it becomes really hard to kind of drive your own fitness and health and nutrition. I think that's the ultimate goal for every human being. We want to be in control of our health and understand this stuff. So 3 basic energy systems. And here's the way that I kind of simplify it. You've got one energy system that is like a drag racing car. It's going to go really fast. It's going to create a lot of power, but it's not going to go a long distance. And the technical term of that energy system is the phosphagen energy system. And it uses mainly what's called creatine and creatine phosphate. And this is why some people supplement with a supplement known as creatine, because it's helping them generate, strength and power very quickly. And then there's a whole other podcast could be on other benefits of creatine, but that's the kind of key aspect there. One energy system that's like all out. So what's an example of that? That would be like a 100-meter sprint when you watch the Olympics, right? So it's really, really fast and powerful, but it's over quickly. Then you have a second energy system that's kind of like a big, powerful pickup truck. So it's got a lot of power. It's going to go further. and more efficiently than the drag racing car, but it's not going to go, as far as a hybrid car, these cars that are, meant to be super, super gas efficient. So this middle energy system predominantly uses carbohydrates. And that's really important because I think a lot of people start to generate fear around carbohydrates because they think that it's going to gain weight. And we'll talk about that in a second. So carbohydrates are my main source of fuel during this high intensity activity. Then when I look at something like more on the aerobic energy system, so that's the third energy system, is the aerobic piece. Now it's longer duration. These are, think of a car that's built to be very fuel efficient. It's not going to go very fast, but it's going to go very far. That's our third energy system. That would be an example of that would be like running a marathon, right? A half marathon, a marathon, these Ironmans and things that people do. The mid-range energy system that burns mostly carbs, that glycolytic system, those are things like an 800-meter sprint, some of your intermittent sports like American football, basketball, soccer, like some of these types of sports are more that intermittent glycolytic type, but everything is mixed. So one of the things that I think everybody needs to be aware of and is really important for the listeners is you don't get to just pick which energy system is working. They're all working at the same time. What matters is what the intensity and duration of your exercise is. That's what's going to determine which of these energy systems we use. All right. So for the listener, might be thinking, okay, does that apply to me and how can I use this information? If you're looking to maximize sport performance, so there are people out there that want every possible benefit, then yes, it's really beneficial for you to, figure out what energy system is the dominant one in your sport and highlight that and really work on that, and try to maximize the other two when you can. I think for most of the average population, most people just want to be fitter. They want to feel better. They want to have more confidence. And one of the things that I tell people is, if that's you, you have so many tools available to you. So you can do things like high intensity interval training, which is a form of cardio that is really, really intense. You're giving it your all out maximal capability. And we'll talk about that in a second. Then there's other forms of cardio that are more either moderate or lower intensity, kind of like the fuel efficient car that you're going to go long term. And so you're not sprinting, but you're not walking either. So you're at some lower to moderate intensity that you can sustain for a longer time period. And then, some people will work on like sprinting and, really shorter intervals and do some of these high intensity things that might be only 6 or 10 seconds and really, really short sprints, which I think is very good for just about anybody to do every now and then. I think to fire up your nervous system and work on power production, especially as someone ages, is really beneficial. So not something that has to be a big part of your training, but that first energy system, that phosphagen energy system, is definitely something that you want to kind of sprinkle in as, kind of a little bit of toppings on top of the sundae, so to speak. So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about okay, which type of cardio do I pick, right? And so that's going to be a common question. The first one is let's talk about fasted cardio briefly, because I do think that, like we talked about, there's a common myth associated with fasted cardio. And the most common one is, if I do cardiovascular exercise fasted, whether that be 8 hours, 10 hours, some people are 12, 16 hours, that you're going to burn more fat if you do it fasted. And then in the long run, you're going to lose more body fat and you will be at a lower body weight down the road, or at least have less body fat overall down the road. And it sounds really good and it sounds appealing, because when you do look at the research, when you do cardiovascular exercise in a fasted state, meaning I haven't eaten anything, your body has to rely on body fat because you don't have the carbohydrates available. So basically, your body uses two main energy sources during exercise: carbs and fats. The higher the intensity, the more carbohydrates you use. The lower the intensity, the more fats you use. So when people do fasted cardio, because they didn't ingest carbohydrates, because your body's not going to hold on to a tremendous amount of carbohydrates like it will fat, you're going to burn more fat in the process. However, throughout the rest of the day, your fat burning will go down and you'll use more carbs as you ultimately eat more carbs throughout the course of the day. So the net result still comes down to how much food are you taking in, what is your energy expenditure, what's your metabolic rate. It still matters the overall calories and paying attention to the overall intake. Because at the end of the day, that's what drives the fat loss more than any other factor that's out there. So one of the downfalls, so some people will say, well, are there downfalls to fasted cardio? There definitely are some. Number one is your performance is most likely going to go down because you don't have the carbohydrates. Many people experience a decrease in performance. Some people can raise their hand and say, not me. And there are definitely people out there, but on the average, the performance, tends to go down a little bit. So that could be a problem. The other thing is sometimes people will then overeat after the period. So they'll go through like some fasted period, then they'll do fasted exercise, and then be too ravenously hungry after that period and eat way more calories than they would have. And it does some kind of, problematic things in the long run and can lead to some weight gain. So I'm not saying that fasted cardio is going to really hurt anybody, but I necessarily tried it for a while. I didn't enjoy it because I felt performance, really suffered because of that. So the big key point here is I just want people to know there is a difference between somebody burning fat and losing fat. Like burning fat for energy doesn't mean that at the end of the day, you're going to lose body fat. It still comes down to the calories. So I just wanted to kind of clear up, a lot of that fasted cardio stuff for sure.
Yeah, we do store some glycogen in the muscle and the liver. Is that right?
Yes.
So if someone has really fueled themselves well in the evening time, so they've replenished their glycogen stores, they've followed a decent nutritional day the day before, then they're training early in the morning, say 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Does that still count as completely fasted? If they've had if they've had a decent, high carbohydrate, refuel their body at nighttime, technically it's fasted, right? But their stores would be still full.
Yeah, that would be the best case scenario. Somebody that understood how much carbohydrate intake that they need per day. So even though they have a fasting window, they still get in enough. They definitely won't have the same performance decrements as somebody that may mismanage carbohydrate usage for sure. So that I think that's definitely really important. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that, let's just say you miss your pre-workout meal, right? So there's a benefit to that pre-workout meal because you have readily accessible carbohydrates that's sitting there within the bloodstream already. You miss out on that. So you get, it's not as beneficial for you if you were trying to maximize performance, but I recognize that not everybody's trying to maximize performance. They want to aesthetically feel and look good as well. And so, like I said, if fasted cardio is motivating to you for whatever reason, and that allows you to stay on some routine and you still can manage your calories, then absolutely it's a tool for you, right? And so that's why it's like there's nothing out there, that you can't find. I can't say that, right? Because somebody will call me out on that, but most things have a time and a place if you just understand them. And so fasted cardio is not necessarily inherently bad. I just don't want people to overthink of I'm going to get this awesome result just because I'm fasting. It's still a lot of other factors that play for sure.
Yeah.
And if when do you train for your CrossFit, morning or afternoon?
So I've been trying to do both. Yep. So I'll do more of the metabolic type CrossFit-y work in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I try to at least 3 or 4 days a week, get more strength and power, do the traditional powerlifting exercises and Olympic lifting, and then try to work on some skills in the afternoon. Someone like gymnastics, muscle ups and double unders and those types of things, try to work on them. So try to do 2 days and separate them, which actually brings me to a good point that I think we should highlight real quick, is what if somebody wants to decide cardio and resistance training? How do I figure out which one do I do first or second? Where do I fit this cardio in? And then we'll get into like the HIIT versus the steady state.
Yeah, awesome. And I was going to ask something as well, which I'll jump in when you said this. Yeah.
Okay. So when should I basically, like, how do I structure cardio and resistance? Now, there isn't a theory, a term that's out in the field that's called, it's basically looking at the interference effect, which is looking at, if I run a lot or did a lot of cardio, is that going to limit my ability to get stronger or my ability to put on muscle? And then vice versa. If I did a lot of strength and power work, is that going to limit my ability, to run a marathon? And the short answer is, if you're on the extreme ends of this, then yes, it's very difficult, if not impossible, essentially, to maximize your strength and then try to maximize your aerobic ability. It's just not going to happen. For the average person, say that again, Alice?
I was going to say, and nutrition might play a part in that too, as well.
A huge part, a huge part. So, but most people are kind of in the middle. I want to get stronger. I want to build some lean mass, but I also want to, get a little bit more cardio and get fitter. So one of the things that I recommend to people is try to separate your resistance training and your cardio on 2 separate days if you can. The more competitive you become, and if you're an athlete and you're doing things like 2-a-days, and it becomes very difficult to kind of separate it like that. But for the average person, I think it's very feasibly done, resistance training and cardio. If based off of your structure and your schedule, you can't do that, and you have to do them in the same day, then one of the common recommendations is try to separate your cardio and your resistance training. A lot of people use a minimum of 4 hours. I think you want to try to get closer to like a 6-hour difference, but try to make sure that you've got some time period in between the two. And then let's say, for example, you're stuck on time and you have to get in 1 hour or an hour and a half, you have to get in both cardio and weight training. It's really beneficial, in my opinion, especially if you're a body composition person or you're looking to get stronger and keep your, maintain lean mass and those types of things. I would say, typically the recommendation is do your resistance training first and then kind of move into your cardiovascular exercise second. So those are just kind of quick, down and dirty, practical tips for people who are looking to combine these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And things like frequency of training comes into it as well, right? So if someone's just general population and they're only training twice a week, then don't think you have to have a cardio day and a strength day.
Right.
Right. Because hitting 2 strength days is going to be, and with a bit of cardio at the end, like you're saying, is going to be more beneficial than going, no, today's cardio day and today's strength day, and just having the strength volume of 1 day per week. So it's still relevant to the athlete or the person and the frequency of training as well.
For sure. It's really important that people understand that, it definitely, you're going to get much more bang for your buck if you did both on both days. There's definitely no question about that. Did you have a question, Gina, that you were
just going back to, you were talking about, fasted cardio in the morning, or fasted training rather, forget the cardio. So if someone is quite athletic, and that's where I was asking you about doing CrossFit, for example, it's quite high demanding early in the morning, what would be your recommendation around a pre-workout source of fuel that may not be a sit-down meal at that time of the morning? What would your recommendation be, maybe for a drink, or how would that play out for you for early in the morning?
Yeah, for sure. I typically, whole foods are better than anything, obviously. So, if somebody has to use a supplement, that's a whole separate conversation. I'm going to assume that that's out. Just what are the whole food recommendations? I love things like, bananas, fruit in the morning is some really good sugar that you're going to be able to utilize during that workout. Carbohydrates, oatmeals, and, you could get into some dairy, some yogurt, get a little bit of protein in there. All these different types of things I think are really, really beneficial. There's a lot of good granola bars and things like that on the run that can be really, really good for you, kind of going into a CrossFit or really just about any type of workout. This is just my recommendation, but I try to tell people, try to sit somewhere between 20 to 40-ish, grams of carbs, 20 to 40-ish grams of protein. That's painting with a super broad stroke brush. But just kind of highlighting getting both of those types of things in there pre-workout is very beneficial. But the carbs are more important than anything, pre-workout by far. And then, you could do some different protein timing stuff based off of what you got in before. But yeah, lots of fruits, get some carbohydrates in, try to get a little bit of protein in, and you're going to be in a really good spot, somewhere between, 60 and 120 minutes before you start that workout.
And it's, individual to the individual as well, right? Because if someone can't have dairy sitting in their gut before doing high intensity training, then perhaps they might be switching to the options that aren't necessarily like dairy based or, whole food based. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of different, that's a great thing, with nutrition, in my opinion, is there's so many different options that are out there. I think we just are getting into a situation where so many people are starting to demonize so many foods and styles of eating. And the average person kind of gets backed into a corner saying, well, I heard that was bad and this is bad and that is bad. And like everything is okay in context. You have to look at the context around all this type of stuff. And
experiment and play with what works for you and figure out your optimal solution for that pre-workout.
Early in my career, I used to always think like, there's like this perfect answer. And if you just did this one thing, and so many people would have success. And the more you start to realize, especially as you are in the field and you're working with human beings that all have different circumstances, everybody has, these different things that they're trying to align to work for them. Everything needs to be individualized for sure. I mean, there's jumping off points in health and fitness, but you have to really understand the person's situation, and it goes way beyond just the nutrition and fitness. Like I said, it's the psychology, it's environment, it's genetics, there's just so much that is involved in trying to make the best fitness and health decisions. Now, do we want to get into high intensity training versus kind of the steady state style of training? Do you need it? Let's talk a little bit about that, because oftentimes I feel like people need to say, oh, I'm doing HIIT training or this high intensity training, and that's going to speed me up and get me better results, and I'm going to get there faster and all this type of stuff. And I get why people feel that way. And I understand that we do live in a society where we want things immediately. But when you make quick health and fitness changes, everything has a sacrifice, right? There's a give and take to everything. So if you try to get somewhere very quickly, there's a big chance you could take 1 or 2 steps forward, but then take even more backwards. So high intensity interval training is definitely a tool that can be used, but I don't think it's a really strong tool that you want to just start off with right away. So I want the listeners to know that it's not a necessity for success. You do not have to do high intensity interval training to get fat loss or to get more aerobically fit. High intensity interval training clearly is going to benefit the aerobic energy system, those faster cars the anaerobic, those faster energy system cars that I was talking about. But I'll talk about why that can be a negative in a second. Steady state exercise. So just kind of a moderate or low intensity steady state exercise. It's going to take longer. So typically the workouts are longer, and that seems to be a detriment for some people, meaning they only have a limited amount of time to work out. And let's say, like Gina, you were just saying, they need to lift weights and do some cardio in the same session, and we're time constrained. This is where HIIT training could be very beneficial over something like more moderate and lower intensity training. So that's really good if you can handle it, though, because high intensity interval training is high intensity for a reason. It's hard, and it can be harder to recover from. So it's not something that you want to do every single day, or really more than, for the average person, 1 or 2 times throughout the course of the week. On the opposite side, when you do kind of the lower intensity, steady state training, that's where, like you guys brought up earlier, the quote unquote fat burning zone, that's where this is coming from. So as I mentioned before in this episode, if I do something really intense, really quickly, like I sprint, or I'm on a bike and I pedal as fast as I can for 30 seconds, that's going to burn predominantly carbohydrates. When I do something at a lower intensity for longer, that's going to burn more fats. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to lose more fat. That's why I said earlier in this, they got to know the difference between I'm burning it for energy and I'm going to lose fat long term because I'm in a calorie deficit. So yes, you know, there was this fat burning zone that people would talk about, saying, okay, if you work at like 60 to 70% of your maximal capacity, or even a little bit less, then you're going to burn more fats than carbs, which is absolutely true. But it's the total calorie amount that's ultimately going to matter. How much energy are you burning? So I can do high intensity interval training, which is much shorter, but a little bit long, it's longer rest in a 20-minute time period, and get the same benefit as a 60-minute long duration cardio session. So that's a really important thing for people to understand. High intensity interval training has been shown, and I don't want people to run with this too far, but it has been shown to help people control appetite better. So first, if there was a client or somebody out there that was struggling with appetite control and you've done everything else, maybe adding some high intensity interval training, if they can tolerate it well and recover well from it, could be a benefit in overall, you know, helping somebody with appetite control. Another benefit to high intensity interval training that we see in the research a lot is, for some people, it's very motivating, because they feel they are working hard, so they feel like they got a really good workout session in, and it motivates them to come back and do more high intensity training, or just more training in general. And that can be very beneficial, provided it's not to the excess, right? Provided that that's not their only driver, and then they're doing high intensity training all the time. The downfall to high intensity interval training is obviously it's high intense. It can be harder to recover from, but at the same time, it could open you up for more injury. And people need to understand that you don't want to just go from doing not much training at all to then sprinting on a treadmill or going all out on a bike per se. Because yes, at some point, these can be good training tools, but they need to be eased into. And I think that's really important to understand. And, you know, keeping these higher intensity interval training sessions short, 20 minutes is probably a relatively, you probably want to keep it 12 to 20 minutes ish, these quick hitting, really high intensity, depending on how many you're doing, and what your workout interval is. But high intensity interval training can be a great tool. You just don't want to feel like you need to rely on it. The moderate, kind of lower intensity training can absolutely get you there as well.
I just have a question about what you just said about the appetite control. Is that in comparison to low intensity cardio, or just on its own?
So it would be in comparison to low intensity cardio.
Okay.
I don't believe that there was, to the stuff that I've read, I don't believe they compared it just to straight control, placebo doing nothing. It was compared to low intensity, which is kind of fascinating, that there are some people, but with the understanding that for some people, it can still go the opposite, right? So it may lead to a greater increase in ultimately energy intake, which may be necessary or may not, depending on their metabolism.
And we still don't know, like, it's such a general term, like high intensity interval training. You don't know what's actually happening in that session. Like, is it more of like a high intensity CrossFit session with intervals, still using load? Or is it just sitting on a bike and doing intervals? Like, there's still so many, like, we don't know what they were studying. We don't know, like, there's so many variables, right?
So let me clarify that. You're right on that from the standpoint of when people talk about HIIT training, like online or social media, they tend to overblow this type of training, meaning a lot of times it's kind of just they're calling circuit training high intensity interval training. If you want the technical definition of like high intensity interval training, it's actually not based off of heart rate. It's based off of VO2 max. So most of it, you're actually in a lab, you've got the mask on, you're getting proper measurements, and it's like 90+% VO2 max. You have to work at that threshold in order to achieve what's considered high intensity interval training. So you got to get to a certain level, and then it's a certain time period, could be as low as 6 seconds up to several minutes. And then you need like a solid rest interval. So you're going to need, you know, upwards of 10 times the amount of rest that the actual work interval was. So that's HIIT training, not what a lot of people are calling HIIT training online and social media.
And that's it, right? Like, minimal people are actually doing HIIT training. They think they're doing HIIT training. They're not. That's right.
Exactly.
So what's that?
I was just thinking exactly. It's funny because I was actually on the treadmill the other day and I was doing intervals, but I was literally jogging. So I was like, I ain't gonna, like, today I just wasn't feeling it, but I want to do intervals. And I was just thinking to myself, gosh, I wonder how many of my clients do their HIIT training like this, where they're doing the intervals, but they're not actually getting to that level, right? They're just kind of like going at moderate pace and then resting and then going at moderate pace again, but they're not actually pushing that limit. So that just brought up a moment for me where I actually thought about my own position.
See, that's why, like, you know, I don't necessarily worry too much when certain people come up to me and they're like, oh, I've done HIIT training, you know, 3 or 4 times this week. And then I say, well, can you tell me what type of, you know, what did it look like? What did you do? And then, you know, they talk to me and they tell me, and I'm like, yeah, that's, you know, that's interval training. So, you know, I don't want to burst their bubble per se. So like, you know, fitness, and this is a hard thing for a lot of people. And I, you know, sometimes us as exercise professionals, we can forget that and think that just because I enjoy this, that other people do as well. You know, so if somebody feels like, oh, I'm doing HIIT training, and just them saying that is motivating, I don't know if it's worth me going and say, hey, excuse me, it's actually not called that, it's this. If that's what's motivating you, and you're not doing true HIIT, you know, 4 or 5 times a week for the average person, and I say, okay, keep doing what you're doing, you're okay. You know, you can do that. That's basically concurrent training, the way I look at it. That's what that person would be doing. So yeah, you know, true HIIT is hard. So true HIIT is where, like, yeah, you're going to be breathing really heavy. You know, it should be very muscularly taxing. It is essentially close to, if not an all-out physical activity.
Great clarification.
We want to talk briefly a little bit about overtraining.
It would be great to quickly touch on it, because that's a term thrown around, I think, quite a lot, just in general. And I think there's a few elements to that. And really, what is overtraining per se, in your opinion?
Yeah, let's briefly talk a little bit about it, because I think there's a ton of myths around overtraining, and I'll try to keep this relatively brief. I know I like to give all the details, but one of the first things I tell people is there's a difference between someone saying that they're overtraining and then someone saying that basically they have overtraining syndrome. So overtraining syndrome is a serious thing, and we don't see it in the research very often. We never see it in the strength and power stuff. We see it in more of the aerobic, the volume sports, the ultra marathons, the Ironmans. That's where you see this overtraining syndrome. So just briefly, what people really are meaning or talking about is overreaching, not necessarily overtraining syndrome. So overtraining syndrome takes months, if not a year plus, to actually recover from. When you look at overreaching, there's two key forms of it. There's functional and non-functional. And basically what that means is, let's say you did an 8-week training cycle and you your performance went down a little bit because you gave it a hard stimulus, you're overreaching a little bit, you're getting to a portion of training that's uncomfortable. Then you have a deload or a taper and your performance goes up. That's functional overreaching. There was a benefit to training extra hard, pushing my body to that limit. Then there's non-functional overreaching, where I get back to either baseline or even less than that. And so that means that I did too much. I pushed my nervous system too much, my muscular system, all your energy systems, everything. You pushed it too hard and you didn't get back to where you wanted to get to. And I think it's really important for people to understand that overtraining or overreaching, what people call overtraining, a lot of it is cleared up with just taking volume and bringing it down just a little bit. You could still keep intensity relatively high. You could cut it a little bit if you want, but it's the volume that essentially just needs to come down. And for many people, they're just not eating enough. So you need to get into the calorie intake and understanding, how much fuel someone needs to fuel hard training. I mean, training and making body composition changes is not easy. So yeah, we do need some stimulus. We do need to push our body, but we do need to make sure that we have these periods where we can bring it down a little bit and let our body recover. And so, I think most people are overreaching. They're not really overtrained. Overtraining syndrome is basically a diagnosis of exclusion. We don't know what these symptoms are caused by. They have to be caused by your training.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Yeah, I'm glad we went through that. That's really helpful, I think, for a lot of people. And it can be in their control to modify the volume, modify what they're doing to pull themselves back to a level for a really nice, smooth trajectory of growing and developing, rather than it being too much too soon. Yeah.
I'll just finish with some quick signs of how do you know if you're overreaching a little bit too far? How do you know if you should dial things back? Some of the more obvious ones are performance obviously goes down, right? You're not feeling it. You're not as strong. Irritability, fatigue, obviously fatigue, sleep disruptions, your resting heart rate is higher than normal, like 10% or more higher than normal. You're getting sick more often, cognitive function and focus, all these things are going down. And then there's also things like testosterone and cortisol ratios get thrown off. So if you're experiencing these types of things, you need to start to look at your training and nutrition and how can you start to either dial the training back a little bit or start to do the right things with your nutrition.
Exactly. And it's funny because obviously when I compete, if anything, the volume tapers back as I'm coming into stage. However, for someone who's not aware of how much they're eating, they could easily be in that position thinking they're overtraining, whereas it's very evidently for me coming from the nutrition, not having enough fuel for the sessions, feeling completely fatigued. So how you feel physically is that you're overtraining. You don't have the energy. But the reality is I'm doing less than what my body's capable of. I'm just not fueling it enough with enough food. And so I think nutrition plays a huge role in being able to recover and really hit those sessions at a good intensity as well. So
yeah, I agree 1,000%. I think more often than not, it's bringing the calories up and fueling better than it is even just limiting some volume for sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot in today's. We always do tend to cover a lot with you, but I feel like that's a good chunk to take away today. And I think overall, when it comes to cardio, I think probably the biggest takeaway that I think we've sort of made in this podcast is that you really do want to choose what works in with your lifestyle, right? As well, like you were saying, do you have time to do, long, lower intensity cardio? Do you have time to split it into 2 sessions? Are you only being able to train a couple times a week? So when you are thinking of adding cardio into your routine, I think it's just important to sort of also choose what do you like doing and what suits your lifestyle, rather than worrying so much about what's the best intensity for fat loss as per se, or what's going to get me more of a result. I think just choosing what's going to fit in your lifestyle and what you enjoy is probably the most important thing, I think.
Yep. I tell everybody, do what you enjoy and try as much as you can. You may think that you don't like one form of exercise and then try it and love it. That's me with CrossFit. I didn't think I was going to fall in love with it like I have. And I did. So, use my case as an example. It's just go try things and see what works best for your lifestyle. Everything's individualized. It's the biggest take home for me.
Yeah.
You.
Thank you so much, Chris. And
Thank
thank you
you
for
guys. I
joining us.
appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, everyone, and we will tune in with you guys in our next one. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
The Body and Beyond podcast is for information purposes only. This podcast does not constitute advice or services, and the statements and views of the hosts and guests are not medical advice. The information provided should not be used for treatment or diagnosis purposes. Please discuss any information from this podcast with your healthcare professional before making any changes to your lifestyle.